In this class, we are going to talk about Boethius, who lived from 480 to 524. One of the most important things Boethius did in his work as a philosopher was a translation of Organon. Organon is one of the works written by Aristotle. And one of the things that Boethius transmitted to the philosophers in the Middle Ages is Aristotle's logic and basic ideas on physics and metaphysics. What Boethius wanted to explain was something about God using philosophical terms, but he took all these philosophical terms from Aristotle. So before we see what Boethius said about God and men, let us explain briefly a few ideas on Aristotle's physics and metaphysics. And now let us start with the physics. Aristotelian physics. An important thing that Aristotle explained was the difference between matter and form. Okay, this is something very important for the philosophy throughout the Middle Ages, and of course in St. Thomas Aquinas, etc. And basically, what Aristotle says is that matter is the principle of a physical thing. So what it's made of, so to speak. So for instance, if we are talking about a dog, okay, there is a principle, of a physical thing. The dog is a physical thing, and what is it made of, so to speak? There is flesh, bones, as dogs do. There are 4 legs, tail, and other things. So you see this tail, these 4 legs, these bones, this flesh, this disposition, these colors, etc. And because of the matter, you identify this, here is a dog, right? So that would be the matter. Then there is form. Okay? Every matter we see in this world is related, is bound to a form. Okay? There are no matters around without a form. Okay? If there is a matter, there is a form, which is what makes the thing to be what it is. The form is what makes the thing to be what it is. Okay, this is important. So in the case of a dog, you see a dog and it behaves like a dog, right? Why? Because there is something there which makes the dog to be what it is, a dog. So for instance, we see, back to the example of a dog, this canine instinct. Okay? The instinct of the dog is different than the instinct of other animals, and there are similarities, but it's very specific of the dog. So you see a few features, external features, principle of physical things, physical, of a dog, and then there is underneath that, so to speak, there is what makes the dog to be a dog and not to be a rabbit or a horse. Okay? So that's what matter is and form in the context of physics. Okay? So Aristotle brought up this distinction in the context of physics, meaning studying nature as we see it with our eyes. What happens is Aristotle developed another science which is called metaphysics. Okay? In Greek, meta is a preposition which means beyond, and physics is the world you can see through the senses, right? So metaphysics is a science which deals with the stuff you cannot see with your eyes, but it's there, beyond the nature you can see with your eyes. And let us explain now what Aristotle said about metaphysics an important distinction which is going to be used for many philosophers in the Middle Ages and of course by Boethius. Then on the side of metaphysics, okay, we are reviewing Aristotle. He spoke about physics, okay, but also he spoke about metaphysics. Metaphysics is the science of the things, about the things that are beyond nature. Aristotle called this science he was developing like this, metaphysics, because the books he wrote about what is beyond matter, beyond what you can see with your eyes, those books were beyond the ones about physics. So metaphysics is the science of the things that are there, but you cannot see them with the eyes of your face, okay? So in physics, he explained there is matter that I can see with my eyes, and I can see as well, not exactly with my eyes, but I assume that there is a form there. So you don't see a dog behaving like a rabbit. No, you see, that would be very weird. So because things are what they are. So there is matter and form in physics, but in metaphysics, Aristotle says there is accidents. There are accidents. What is it? What's the way you could classify the things you can see with your eyes? So when you look at a forest, for instance, let's take that example, a forest. What are the things you see with your eyes, and how can you classify the things you see with your eyes? Okay, that's important, because those are the accidents. And the accidents stand on substance. Okay, substance is a Latin word which etymologics is sub stare, which means to be under, somehow, to stand under. And that would be the translation into English. Substance is what stays under. And the verb substare would mean in English to stand under. Okay, so accidents are there. You can see a few things with your eyes, you can classify them, and those things are not in the air. They inherit, they are standing on something. That's the substance, okay? And let us explain these accidents according to Aristotle. There are 9. There is quantity, there is quality, there is relation, there is habitus, there is time, there is location, situation, action and passion. Okay? So 9 accidents on one substance. And back to the example of the forest or trees, okay? You go to a forest and you see trees, and you see this tree there, okay? So in that tree you see quantity. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see quality. Maybe it's a pine tree, maybe it's a palm tree. There is quality, okay? There is relation. The way those elements relate to other elements in nature, okay? So there is this plant which climbs up other trees, okay? There is a capacity of relation between creatures. There is habitus, the way these trees or palm trees or whatever it is, the way they develop and grow. There is time, for instance, age. It's not the same a small tree, a young tree, than an old tree. Location. You can be in a forest in this side, or maybe next to the soil, or maybe you are a plant which grows another tree, whatever. Situation, you can be in different situations in that forest. Action, what a tree can do. It can grow, it can, maybe grows leaves, all these things. So action and then passion, what the tree can suffer, because you can apply something to the tree from the outside and the tree would suffer somehow, So all these are the accidents, and when you see all these things in this tree and you grasp all the features of the tree, you know that the substance of that is a tree, okay? So that's super important. Accidents are beyond matter, okay? Time, location, you don't see a number written in the branches of the tree, okay? But there is time, there is location, situation, action, passion. So the accidents are beyond what you see with your eyes, but those accidents stand, upon the substance. And the substance is what supports the accidents. When you see all these features we are talking about, talking about, then you can see there is a tree here. So accidents and substance. We get to know the matter and the form more or less with our senses. That would be the first step of our knowledge, according in terms of St. Augustine. But the substance and the accidents are grasped by the intellect with, it is called first apprehension. Which is the operation that happens in your mind when you see all these accidents, which are in this matter, and then you realize there is a tree here, and this is a tree, and this is not a rock. It's different, because the accidents and the substance of the rock is different. Okay, so Aristotle says matter and form. That's the way we classify things in physics. But beyond physics, how can we classify, how can we explain what is there? There is these accidents and substance. And this is going to be very important to understand what Boethius has to say about God and about men. So now, back to Boethius, who brought these ideas from Aristotle in his translation of the Organon. And it was very useful because he brought up these ideas and passed them on to the philosophers in the Middle Ages. So now, with the language that Aristotle used in his work, he explained different kinds of substances. And Boethius says there are corporeal substances. Okay, so these are substances with matter and substance. Okay, so there are bodies, you can see the matter, there are bodies, and you can identify underneath, so to speak, these bodies and a specific substance. These are called by Boethius corporeal substances. Okay, these are human beings, etc., etc. But he also considers incorporeal substances. Incorporeal substances which would have only substance. So no matter, but substance. Okay, which makes these beings different, totally different than these ones. Here, for instance, there would be angels, there would be ideas, principle, mathematical abstractions or principles, etc. But there would be substance somehow. And, of course, God would be an incorporeal substance, but what happens with God, as he explains, is God is the only substance which is super substantial. It's a super substantial substance. Which means that it exists by itself. So Boethius came up with this explanation of God. So God is a moved mover. Okay, the substance which is supersubstantial. And of course the qualities that are in God are not accidents, and he explains that, for instance, to say about God that he is just, to be just, when we say that God is just, to be just is the same to say, to be God. To be just equals to be God. Qualities that we can apply to God are not accidents, are the substance of God. To be just equals to be God. God is the unmoved mover. Okay, that's the vision that Boethius has about God. Then there is his definition of person, which is very important because it's going to be very well received by philosophers throughout the Middle Ages, for instance, St. Thomas Aquinas. So the person is defined by Boethius as nature rationalis individua substantia. Which means, more or less in English, is individual substance of rational nature. That would be a definition of what person is. An individual substance, so a person is an individual, and the substance is an individual, but the nature of this substance is rational, and it's limited because it's limited to an individual. This definition is important because it will be used by St. Thomas Aquinas and other philosophers in the Middle Ages. And finally, there is an interesting argument which is about God's foreknowledge and human beings' freedom. It's one of the arguments that Boethius brings up, which is very interesting because even nowadays, people bring up this question every now and then. So how is it possible that God, knowing what people were going to do with their freedom, still God wanted them to exist and to go ahead, even though God knew that they were going to make a bad use of their freedom because they were going to go against him, etc. So how do you explain the fact that God has somehow foreknowledge and the human being's freedom? So how that plays out. And the thing is, Boethius says that this is not the way to bring up the question, okay? Because in the idea of God's foreknowledge, we are assuming, okay, that God knows now what is going to happen later, right? God knows now what that person is going to do in the future with his life. And still that person is going to be a bad person, and still God gives to him freedom. How is that possible? Here's the thing. We are assuming, okay, that God knows what is going to happen in the future, but that's wrong. Because in God there is no time. God is an eternal present. Everything happens in front of him in an eternal present. So there is no future for God. Because he is eternal present. Okay, so that question brought up in those terms is wrong. Okay, There is no such a thing as future in God. God knows what is going to happen in the future. No, everything is happening in an eternal present in God. So that's the first thing, just to frame the question properly. And then there is other point that he brings up, which is the fact that God knows, because God knows in present, in an eternal present, that doesn't imply that our decisions are not free. That doesn't imply that our decisions are determined and necessary. Okay? It doesn't follow. God knows in an eternal present, therefore human beings' actions are determined and not free and necessary. No, that's not true. God's knowledge doesn't imply that my actions are determined. Okay, determined or necessary. So not free at the end of the day, okay? The fact that God knows in the present doesn't mean my actions are determined and necessary. No, because I still have the freedom. It is very important to separate God from creatures, okay? There is no pantheism in the Christian philosophical understanding of the person. So even though we have been created by God, and even though God knows everything in an eternal present, that doesn't mean that we are determined, that we are obliged to do a few things. We have still our free actions, because there is difference between God and creatures. There is no emanation from God, so there is no pantheism. We have our autonomy, a small one, but there is some autonomy.